Thank you. So I'm going to call the school committee to order. This is a public open meeting. Today we have Dr. Jill Geiser with us. And in just a moment, I'm going to ask Dr. Geiser to say a few words about herself, what attracted her to Belmont, and why she thinks she's a good fit for the next superintendent of the Belmont Public Schools. And then I'm going to open this up to questions. This is a public forum. I will be ending this meeting at the 6:30 mark, as we do have another candidate who will be coming after that. So we'll be taking as many questions as possible within that time. So I will ask that when you ask a question of Dr. Geiser, that you ask a question that can be answered in 2 to 3 minutes, so that we can try to fit in as many questions as possible. There's a podium over here to my right, your left, where if you want to ask a question, you can come up and ask that question. I do want to let people know that we are happy and very lucky to have Belmont Media Center here with us this evening. So we are recording this meeting. This meeting will be posted along with the school committee interviews as soon as all the candidates have completed the process on Friday. The public forums are also being live streamed, so this can be viewed right now as we are here. I would like to just say one thing before we begin taking questions and hear from Dr. Geiser, and that is just to please remember to keep your questions specific to Dr. Geiser's experiences in her work that would inform her work here as the next superintendent of Belmont Public Schools, including relationships that she might have had professionally. But please, no personal questions, as they do not relate necessarily to her job here and are just not appropriate for this forum. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Geiser and go for it.
Thank you. I appreciate, first of all, the flexibility around the format. Originally was supposed to be on stage, but I prefer to be a little bit closer to the audience. I had a great day today, talking with staff, school leaders, school committee, and then admittedly my favorite part was talking with students today. It was great to see them in classrooms and talking with the high school kids at the high school. And now I have the opportunity to speak with you all, the larger Belmont community, the parents, the families, and so I'm really excited to be here. My name is Jill Geiser. I'm the assistant superintendent in Billerica currently. I'm also a resident here in Belmont. I've lived here with my family for the past 14 years. I'm also a parent. I have a child that attended both Wellington and Chenery, and I owe a debt of gratitude to the teachers that really helped Jordan grow and thrive throughout their early years. I started my career in education as a teacher. I've taught in Arizona to Navajo students. I've taught in Virginia, in a suburb outside of DC. I've also had overseas teaching experiences in Nepal and Thailand. I also spent a couple years in New York City working for an NGO supporting newly arrived refugee youth who just arrived into the country. My entire first decade of my career has allowed me to build up a really strong global view of education. But then I started on a leadership path, and I did that starting with an assistant principal position in Lawrence for about 3 years. And then I went on to be a middle school principal, also in Lawrence, for 3 years. And then I went on to Somerville to be a principal of the Healy School, which is a pre-K through 8 school, and that was for 5 years. And then I stepped into a central office leadership role 6 years ago when I became the assistant superintendent in Billerica. Throughout my career as an educator, as a teacher and school leader, I have worked at every single level of the system, pre-K through 12. I've also worked in different communities, different contexts, and those experiences have allowed me to gain insight into different ways to build education systems. The experiences have also allowed me to develop a keen understanding about how do we serve the needs of all students, no matter their learning profile, from those that struggle to those that excel academically. As a superintendent, it's incumbent upon me to make sure that those who are working directly with our kids have what they need to do their job well. Belmont is an amazing community. I'm always so impressed with the work that is done here. It's unique, and it is dedicated, people here are dedicated to the education of the kids. I share your commitment to keeping the Belmont school system the best in the state, and that's why I want to be your next superintendent. So with that, I will take some questions.
Excellent, thank you. When you come to the podium to ask a question, if you could please introduce yourself and then ask your question.
I told the teachers today I would cold call.
My name's Steve Sloan. I was curious, we're a state that doesn't have a recess guideline. We're a town that doesn't have a recess policy. There's broad disparity at some grade levels in terms of Belmont versus some of our neighboring towns. I was curious how you think about recess for different grades and you know, as a mechanism of promoting healthy children who learn well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are also having recess conversations where I am in Billerica. I will first start by saying recess is about, you know, obviously giving students movement breaks, giving them a place for that physical activity to take place in a less structured way. The other part about recess that is very beneficial is the unstructured time, where students have an opportunity to interact with each other and learn those really necessary social skills. For example, resolving conflicts and things like that. So the one thing about recess time in the day is that we do have to balance it against academic time that we have to provide students. And it's not just about, obviously, the time requirements that we have to meet, but also making sure that the kids have ample time to be able to dive into the learning that they need to do in order to walk away with the understandings and the skills that we want them to. So it's not an easy answer about how to do that. If we could stretch time, that's what I would want to do, but that's not always an option. If that's a discussion people want to have, happy to have it, and I would want to try to explore ways to, maybe it's, even if it's not called recess, but how those goals that recess gets us to with, movement breaks and things like that, how can we reach those goals through any mechanism, whether it's recess or something else?
Okay, well, thank you for being here and for applying. My name's Mary Lewis. I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader in the system, and I'm also a town meeting member. This question requires a little bit of a preamble. I'll try to go quick. So as you probably know, Massachusetts Proposition 2.5 allows for towns to vote tax increases for operating budgets in an override. While the superintendent doesn't run an override campaign, its success is dependent on transparency, trust, and consensus building between the school department and the citizens of Belmont. It's a lot to ask of someone new, but since if you've been following the budget discussions, you know that an override may occur in April of 2024, how would you, drawing on specific experiences that you have of transparency, trust, and consensus building, achieve these 3 goals in the first 6 months of your tenure? Thank you.
You say consensus, transparency, trust building.
Correct.
Got it. Okay, so I always say the trust building comes through communication's a key factor there, how you're communicating, what messaging you're putting out there, and how clear you are on that messaging. The other part about trust is there's that big match between actions and words, following through with what you're going to say, and communicating out what your intentions are in terms of what you're doing. So that's a big piece when you're talking about building that trust. Explaining your thinking behind decisions is important. That also feeds into consensus building. You have to find that sort of commonality. If you're sitting across a table from somebody and you find yourself in a major disagreement, you have to bring yourself to some kind of commonality as a starting point, because in the end, we do have shared goals. We do have shared priorities. And if you find yourselves going astray, you have to bring it back there and remind ourselves that we are all in this together and we work for towards the same goals. That is like very important in that whole process. So how I would do it coming in, I mean, that would be part of the entry planning that I would do, talking with everybody, both individual conversations, group conversations, and processing what I'm hearing, and building a picture of where the different perspectives are, how people are looking at the budget in this case, but anything in the district differently, and what conversations need to happen to bring people closer together so that we can reach a collaborative problem solution, or a collaborative solution as much as we can. Anything else on that? Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Geiser. My name is Jane Shapiro. I was a teacher at the Burley School in New York City, have volunteered here. Children I know are having very bad dreams confused about the pronoun subject. Also, good schools educate and shouldn't brainwash. To frighten children should not be the goal of education. And one more thing, it's more than unfortunate in this town, vocational schools are considered unworthy. I happen to think vocational schools are very important. If you could respond, I would appreciate it.
So responding specifically to the first part?
Well, the pronoun, children are having bad dreams here and in other municipalities whom I know, children I know. Yeah, so, you know, if you're talking about, and I said this, I was talking a little bit about this in the school committee meeting, our goal is to help students develop their understanding about all kinds of issues in a way that involves them where they feel included in the classroom. Mm-hmm. So whatever's happening in the classroom has that goal in mind. Mm-hmm. And if students are feeling sort of, you know, confused about it or have questions about it, absolutely we need to work with them. And figure out a way to help support their learning as they, you know, if these kinds of things come up. Mm-hmm. It's never about trying to it's never about trying to make students feel anxious about it, but it's helping them to become aware of some things that they need to be aware of, and doing it in a way where they can access the learning mm-hmm. and that level of awareness, mm-hmm. and not push them away. What about vocational schools? What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely support vocational schools.
Good, very important too.
Okay. I didn't know if there was something specific about them that you were asking. Okay, great, thanks.
Hi, welcome. My name is Linda Nickens, and I am the grandmother of a 12-year-old, a 6th grader. Not in the Belmont Public Schools anymore. She's actually in a Catholic school. And as you know, we have some financial constraints in the town. And some classes and some language classes and instrumental classes and some math classes have had to be limited because of financial constraints. My question is, and you only get to choose one, if you could choose only one focus for the Belmont Public Schools, would it be to focus on a strenuous academic program which challenges children of all levels, from special needs to children who might have access to Russian math, or would it be to use your focus on DEI?
So that's interesting because I would not do one to the exclusion of the other. I'm sorry. So Yeah, just because both of those, the thing with the academics for students, in order for students, and I think I mentioned this earlier with the school committee, in order for students to be able to access rigorous academics, they need to feel like they belong in the classroom. They need to feel like they're included in the classroom. That is what, for me, DEI work is about. It is making sure that every single child, no matter what their demographic is, no matter what their learning profile is, feel like they're a valued member of that community, that learning community. When that happens, then we can get to the academic part. So that's why it's hard to really say one to the exclusion of the other, because I do see them interrelated. I know that DEI can, and I think I spoke about this with the school committee, equity and DEI, these are big terms, so we need to really understand what they are, and for me, that's what they are. They're about students' experiences in the classroom, and then how that leads into students' ability to access the academics.
Hi, my name is Melissa Irian. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 8, and I have twin 7th graders and an 11th grader that's out of district. I am curious to know your opinion about whether you would allow field trips for all grades, and whether you would authorize those and advocate for them. Thank you.
That's a great question. So I mentioned travel in my opening statement. I put field trips, that's sort of the larger umbrella. Field trips are absolutely incredible opportunities for students to get in terms of their own growth and learning. I will talk about, I do support field trips. It always has to have, for me, it's about what are the goals of the trip, but also obviously the safety measures that go along with it, and making sure all students are included on those field trips. In my experience, when I was a principal at the Healy, that whole school was all about off-site learning. So when I stepped into the role, they were already in the practice of sending, for example, 3rd and 4th graders off to next year's classroom for a week. So what we ended up doing was designing the off-site learning program where from 3rd through 8th grade, there was a sort of a signature trip that all the students did. And we ended up doing, I think, Museum of Science in 3rd grade, Redgate Farm in 4th grade, Nature's in classrooms in 5 and 6, but then in 7 and 8, they alternated years going to New York City and Washington, D.C. So yeah, I definitely believe in the value of the trips. My questions that I always ask is, do all students have access, especially if there's a financial component? So for me, that's an important piece. And then of course, all of the logistics that go along with that. I'll also add on to that, we're currently in Billerica expanding our travel experiences for students there as well. So Billerica has always done language-based travel, which has been great for the students. I pulled together a group of teachers and was communicating with representatives from EF Education around how do we expand from language-focused travel to other areas. So we have now, I'm getting ready to put trips through a STEM trip to go to Belize, a STEM trip to go to Costa Rica, an arts-focused trip to London and Paris. So that's the work that we're in the process of doing, because those are, like I said, just really valuable for students to experience.
Hi, I'm Tara Donner, and I'm the parent of a Belmont High student and a Chenery student, and a teacher myself, and a former school committee member here in Belmont. And I was wondering if you could tell us, what do you see as some of the similarities and the differences between your previous positions and the superintendency here in Belmont? And in addition to that, do you foresee some challenges in adapting your previous experience to the position in Belmont?
Yeah, great question. So, and when I gave my intro, I talked a little bit about sort of what the different experiences that I've had, how that has shaped my lens on education in terms of building systems and responding to the needs of students. So I will say, based on that, I mean, you do have, in Belmont, obviously there's a huge population of very strong academically strong students here, but there are also students that struggle as well. You have students that have special needs that require specialized instruction. You have students that come in with a different first language that are learning English. So I've had experiences in all of those areas. And I would say, like, how we have developed programming around those students have always been in sort of collaborative settings. So as a principal, I work with teachers and other coordinators in the district when I was in Somerville and Lawrence. And then now, same thing, I'm working with my EL coordinator around EL programming, special ed director around special ed programming, and so forth. So I've had that experience with all different kinds of populations. There's a specific area of Belmont that I know that the question comes up around more on the accelerated part. And so when I was at the Healy School in Somerville, it was quite a mix of students. We had students, you know, that the school pulled from the neighborhood area, which include, and there was a low-income housing area in that neighborhood that we pulled from. But we also, there were parents from across town of higher income levels that also came to the school. So we had a big range of students in that school. We had students that were very, you know, much accelerated in their learning. So we had to figure out how to challenge them, how to meet their needs as well, while we were also trying to figure out how to support the students who were maybe performing a couple of grades below grade level. So all of those experiences I definitely bring here to Belmont, and I think I can translate it over to this role, because the other piece to that too is no matter where you are, it is about relationships. It's about the connections you make with people. It's about how your kids feel in the classroom. Though, whatever your community, those are the things that are also important.
Thank you. And I will take I think I see two more people who are in line, so I'll be taking two more questions, and then I'll be closing this portion of the forum.
Hi, I'm Rachel Watson. I am the co-chair of Belmont's CPAC, and I wanted to ask you about, I mean, it's maybe a bit of an obscure subject, but
Could you move a little closer to the microphone? I'm sorry.
About the record keeping for students on IEPs and 504s. As you know, a while back they did an audit, a DEI audit, but also at the same time they did an audit of our special education, like our record keeping, our policies, and there were a lot of areas where we had room to grow. And additionally, since then, because we have been facing budget cuts, we've lost a lot of sort of mid-level administrators who were putting in a lot of the work that goes into leading IEP teams, keeping the records flowing, and I'm hearing from parents that, like, you know, they're not receiving their documents in time. Their meetings are not being held in time. Their evaluations are not happening on time. Their 504s not being followed, they don't know who to talk to. So how would you address this as superintendent, knowing that we have the budget issues that we do, and knowing that this is impacting students and families?
That's a good one. Yes, I mean, you're talking about, this is a very high level of compliance need when you're talking about hitting those deadlines with special ed. So if I start with the expectation that those deadlines get met, and that's the first sort of step to make it clear that this is important. Sometimes if you don't make that as clear, people think, oh, I can slide on this, and that's okay. The other part of it too, given how you just framed it, I have questions, and so I would probably ask some of those questions to find out where the actual root causes are, and then address it there. So I don't have necessarily all the information, but that would be my process going in, of asking questions of, like, where is it falling short? You know, is it things like, do people understand their role? Do they understand what is the process that has been laid out? Is it that people are not following the process or the guidelines, that the internal protocols? Or is it that they don't understand it, or are they just not clear? Like, those are some of the questions that I would ask, and then based on those answers, I would try to troubleshoot the root of that problem. But I, like, knowing that's a big deal for me. And so I would definitely put some emphasis on needing to make sure that those deadlines are there, and that families, like, if they have an issue, that they have someone to go to that they can work with.
Hi, my name is Chris McLaughlin. I have a 8th grade boy at Chenery, so welcome tonight. But just along the lines of you talking about all kids feeling welcome and comfortable in class, there is a huge push for DEI, equity the past 2 or 3 years, just coming off the heels of the pandemic. And I feel like an unintended consequence of all the work is that some of the children that aren't from marginalized communities don't feel comfortable at school. They feel targeted, they feel like they're walking on eggshells, they feel like they're afraid to have discussions because they have been reprimanded, or there are disciplinary issues that aren't the same for students from both communities. So along those lines, I wanted to ask, just a Google search realized that you were involved in a nonprofit that had Monica Kahn and Grant come to speak to Billerica. And just looking up about her, one of her posts is like a black man whipping 2 white men and says, "Happy Black History Month." So that's the kind of atmosphere that, like, my son is white and feels worried about making mistakes at school. He sometimes feels uncomfortable talking to his teachers because there is such a push for DEI and equity, and there is shame and blame involved, and they feel targeted. And just 2 quick examples. CRT is not supposed to be taught at the high school. And last year, I had twin girls that were seniors, and one kept telling me about her lessons in English. And I was like, that's critical thinking, that's what you have to learn. And it took me 2 months to realize that she showed me her curriculum, and it was critical race theory for a week. And I it was teacher's choice, talked to Superintendent Phelan about it. We don't teach it, back and forth. Send me what you have. I sent it, and he said, "You're right." So, and then I just found out that in kindergarten, they're reading Race Cars, a book which, to me, is the same oppressor-oppressed message. And I think for a 5-year-old, that's really difficult to figure out. So I just want to find out, at what point do you think there are other things we need to talk about too? Like, of course, we all want children to feel comfortable, and we want to help any kid struggling, but there's just been such an overwhelming focus on it. I think you're alienating, isolating, and harming some children, even though it's a good cause, and I know why people are doing it. And I would just like you to speak to what happened with that, having her speak, because it seems like a poor decision. I think the superintendent had to apologize for it.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you asked that. I can definitely clarify sort of what happened with that particular situation. So last fall, I'm a part of a committee called Billerica Partners for Education. It is similar to the FBE here in Belmont. So we run a grant program for teachers to apply for small grants. And so the teacher of the Student of Color Association at the high school applied for a grant, and one aspect of the grant was to pay the speaker's fee for that she wanted to bring into the high school. And so at that point, we agreed that that was in line with our grant, it was an innovative grant guidelines. At that point, we weren't approving the speaker, but we were approving the project to fund the project. So that was my role in that particular situation. After it left us, then it was in the hands of the teacher and the administration and the students too, because they were organizing the whole assembly in honor of Black History Month. So with that assembly, they brought the speaker in, which we actually didn't learn of it until after the assembly, and we started to hear from folks from the community. So the one thing about that particular situation that was the challenge part of that situation, so the students themselves, they chose a speaker, and it was supported by the principal with the teacher, And because they wanted to have somebody come in and give a message to the students, and when they left the assembly, the feedback we got from students was pretty positive. Like they thought the message was powerful, which was not like, the message was not like the other content that people have encountered from the speaker outside. But it was where the student feedback was pretty powerful. So with that, though, with adults in the community, the part that was concerning to me was that the response to the speaker being in the school was also a response to student voice in that particular situation. And I was making sure that I wasn't condemning their voice in terms of, having, whatever the response to the speaker was. So those were the sort of questions that we were asking in response to the assembly. But in terms of like the decision for her to come in, I mean, that was more of a school level decision. And so, and then so what we were doing was working with the students after the fact around making sure that it wasn't about thwarting their voice, but it was more about making sure that the community understood what we were trying to do with that assembly. So that's essentially sort of how it played out. And I would say, I mean, like I said, if it comes down to students' experiences and how they exercise leadership, that is what's important to me. So that's why, like in that particular situation, if they could have taken other steps, sure, and I get that part of it, and we reflect back on that. But in terms of the students' experiences with it, that's who I support. Like I support how we sort of bring them through that process of exercising those leadership skills.
I think the problem is that there was a teacher involved with that the guidance about that she was under federal indictment, that maybe they should have told the children this is the next.
Like that's part of the reflection.
There's got to be a teacher oversight, like more of the process too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Geiser. So with that, I'm going to end this portion of the forum and take a quick break before our next candidate comes in. I want to welcome Dr. Simon, who is here with us today for the public forum portion of her day in the Belmont Public School District. And in just a moment, I will turn it over to her to introduce herself. I want to remind people that this is being recorded. It will be available to the public on our website once all of the candidates have completed their interviews and forums on Friday. Along with that, there will also be a link to our feedback survey so that you can provide feedback on all the candidates to the school committee. That survey will remain open until Sunday evening for you to provide feedback. After Dr. Simon gives her introduction, I will open it up for questions until 7:10, and at that time I will be ending the public forum. Just a reminder to people that the questions should really be about her professional background and her attributes as potentially the next superintendent of the Belmont Public Schools, not questions related to her personal life. And also, for the sake of everybody being able to hear the questions and responses, if people could please refrain from clapping, I would appreciate that as well. So, Dr. Simon, I will turn it over to you to introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you. Hello. My name is Carlee Simon. I am a native Floridian. I grew up with two parents who were educators. My mom was a special education teacher. My dad was a school counselor. Combined, the two of them had probably 80 years of education experience within the district that I ended up actually being the superintendent of. But I had quite a long journey in that process. I would not consider myself the traditional path school superintendent. I have a bachelor's in architecture, and when I completed my bachelor's, I naively thought I needed to take a break from architecture and I would go and teach, which was, you know, the simple mindset of a 22-year-old woman. So my first teaching position was in Hillsborough County, and I taught at a high school that probably was very similar to the size of Belmont School District, and I taught wood shop and drafting as my first teaching job. I found it challenging to have freshman boys in power tools, and so that was my last year of being a shop teacher and drafting teacher, and so I ended up becoming a high school mathematics teacher. I taught for 5 years. I picked up my husband at the Home Depot. He was department head of lumber while I was teaching shop, and I converted him from a Home Depot employee to one of the best elementary school teachers I have ever known. In that process, we had 3 boys, and I was able to go back to graduate school while he was teaching with other young children, and I finished my master's and my doctorate. My specialization is in education finance. And after that, I graduated in 2010, and I moved to Cincinnati, where I took on a professional position as a professor at the University of Cincinnati in their Ed Leadership program, where I trained teachers to become principals and principals to become superintendent. 6 months after I started, my husband got diagnosed with cancer, and we spent the first 18 months of my 10-year process with him being sick with cancer and dying with cancer. Obviously, that period of time had a profound influence on my life, but it also really engaged me in opportunities that I think our education system should address. I became a single parent overnight, and I had to navigate the school system from a very new relationship of now being the single parent with 3 children, 3 young children. They were 9, 6, and 3. So that started off quite a bit of my education advocacy work. After 8 years of working at the University of Cincinnati, I moved back to my hometown. My dad was diagnosed with cancer. He is actually fine, but I learned how precious time was, and I wasn't going to lose it. So I moved back home. I did my advocacy work. In that process, I also decided to seek a second doctorate, and the focus was on design, construction, and urban planning at the University of Florida. I'm very much interested in school facilities, and in this process, I also became much more interested in the urban planning aspect of school facilities and the communities that they serve. And one of the reasons is because I focused on funding equity when I was a faculty member. And I started to realize in my second doctorate practice that I cannot address equity without also understanding the communities and looking at it not just within the school, it has to be surrounding the school. In my process of advocacy, my community went through a massive change. So we had 5 board members on the school board. I was a parent of children in the district, and we had COVID shut down our schools. We were not shut down as long as you all were. We started in March, and actually the governor asked us to come back to school that following fall. We were allowed at that year to have an online instruction, so families could stay at home, but we had to be open for families who wanted to come in school. So at the beginning of this, I was the parent navigating a school district and trying to advocate for a safe opening. And in that process, we also had the change of the board majority. This was after George Floyd, and it was the first time in history that my county had a black board majority. We were, before COVID, an A-ranked school district, and we also had the largest achievement gap between black and white students. So essentially, we were an A-ranking school district to some of our students, but not to all of our students. So the new board, because I had built relationships advocating for students who were being disadvantaged by the system, felt that I was the person to come in as the interim to serve this need and address the achievement gap. At that time, again, another moment of being naive, we all thought we were going to have the spring 21 of COVID and we would be through with it, and that, of course, did not occur. So when I came in, the charge was to respond to COVID and start working on our learning loss and our mental health supports that we needed to have in place, and also to provide those same types of supports to our teachers and our staff members, because we had a lot of fear. In that process, in June, the governor vacated one of my board's seats. This was one of the board members who brought me in. I had a bit of a divided board. We had a massive change within the community. I knew that going into this position, but I did not realize that I had one board member who lived 300 feet outside of her district. So the seat was vacated for the whole summer. I had 4 board members, and they were fairly divided on many of our decisions and processes. The one thing that did unite them was a week before our teachers came back to school, I had 2 staff members die from COVID. And we masked all of our employees, and the board voted to mask all of our students. This was against the governor's wishes, and this started us on a very intense journey of being the first district to do masking. We had 12 others join us in this process, which was over 50% of the state of Florida's student population. But in this, of course, it threw us into really the political eye of the storm. While we were having this disagreement with the governor, we also were still needing to address the safe environment. We had turnover in our staff, and we needed to also make sure that we had the mental health support. So although that took up quite a bit of time, we were making sure that we were looking at systems and how we're serving our students and our families and our teachers, working on ways to provide a safe and healthy work environment for our staff and a learning environment for our students. Some of those systems had alignment with each other where we were able to serve both needs, and some we had to have very different approaches. In that process, after the Omicron virus, actually, I'm sorry, I'll go back. When we voted on doing the masking for the students, Governor DeSantis appointed a board member in the vacancy seat. And after Omicron, that board member asked to put my contract on the agenda, and I was voted for removal with no cause in a 3-2 vote. The unfortunate situation from my perspective is that we were really doing good work, and it was interrupted by the tension and the politics of what was currently happening. I do believe we were making the right strides and steps towards supporting our students and our community. And because of that, I would like to continue the work that I had cut short. It was the most fulfilling job I have ever had. It was also the hardest job I've ever had. I think we were doing the work that was meeting the needs of the students and supporting our teachers so they can meet the needs of the students, and I would like to do that again. One of the reasons I applied to Belmont is because that discussions of diversity, equity, inclusion are very much important. I've heard that question about approaches and strategies in every single group I have met with, which, if you're following anything in Florida right now, I appreciate that we are having discussions and making sure that we have high-functioning, high standards, high expectation learning environments for all of our students so everyone can be successful. And I see that opportunity here. The other thing that I see here that makes me very happy is I have spent my entire life advocating for public education and hoping for communities to invest in their education. And I think that Belmont is actually a very good example of what it looks like to have a community very much invested in their education system. Your schools are beautiful. Your staff members are amazing experts. The turnover rate of teachers being almost nothing is admirable beyond all words I cannot express. I can tell you now, especially compared to what I'm seeing in Florida, everyone should be patting themselves on the back because that's exceptional. I would like to be a part of this journey. I think I can offer insights, new perspectives, alternative ways of approaching problems, and I would like to be a part of this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. And with that, if people would like to ask a question, you can come to the podium. Please introduce yourself to Dr. Simon before you ask your question, and please try to ask a question that can be answered in 2 to 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Christine McLaughlin. Welcome, and I agree with you, time is precious. I'm sorry for your loss. Just along the lines of when you mentioned the masking, and just a Google search on all the candidates, just realized what had happened with your position in Florida. My question is, when you have issues that get towards the political, and you just said when you continue to mask. Now, I think he had said that there was no masking. So there are some parents in your district that probably didn't want masking. So, this is a blue state, but there are some people that are middle and do share, some beliefs from the conservative side, some from the liberal. So my question is, what about the parents who didn't want their children masked? And it leads me into my initial point was just doing a Google search. I did see a post that you made about Governor DeSantis's book next to a How to Not Be a Racist book at Target. And it, just in fun, I see you, Target employee. So to me, that's kind of implying that DeSantis is a racist. So my question is, when you disagree politically with someone, as you did, or policy, but a lot of it is politics, it sounds like you went against the law in Florida. Like, what happens here? Like, there are some parents here that want every child to feel comfortable, that support DEI, but a lot of us feel that it's getting overwhelming, that we're excluding other issues, such as the recent CDC report on female teenagers, girl teens. 1 in 3 have seriously contemplated suicide. So the mental health aspect from COVID, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, Students Against Drunk Driving. There are just fentanyl, buying drugs off Snapchat. There are so many issues that I feel like everything is so overwhelming DEI now. We support every child feeling comfortable, but that's been like the recurring theme that everyone is talking about. So I guess to wrap it up, my question is, what happens when your politics or your policy goes against the law, or the half of the parents that maybe don't want their children wearing masks? How do you compromise?
So there was, obviously, this was a very intense period, and there was a lot ongoing at the time. So it actually wasn't a law when it first came down. Actually, how it all began was that the governor was going to press conferences and saying what he wanted, but he hadn't put in place the actual procedures and policies that would require the districts to do certain aspects. What we had in my community was, I was following the direction of the board. So my board voted unanimously to mask students, and when this was an actual rule. What we did do, because we did have families who felt this, we had the option of, you didn't have to mask if you could get a medical exemption. We also had alternative options. There was a voucher option that the governor offered, and then there was an asynchronous online option as well. But we did want to work with families, and we had families who did go and get the medical exemption. And what we were trying to do was provide a safe learning environment for all students, and that was the direction to go with the governor. In this situation, it was political. I think right now I can speak specifically about Florida. Everything about it, public education is political at this moment. And I did what, one, my board had voted to do, and I also did, at that point, what I thought was really important for the organization in order to function. I needed staff members to mask, because when I had my 2 staff members die, they were bus drivers. Almost my entire transportation and facilities department was either quarantined or sick. And I couldn't have people in my schools safely if I didn't have enough adults. And so these were things that we were trying to work with. I really was hoping in this process to work with the governor and work with the Department of Education about how to make these processes where we could have these environments for families who look at, what they're wanting in their own family and how to meet the needs. One of the challenges with the public education system is that we need to provide a safe space for all involved, and that can be challenging, especially now with a lot of the political discussion. As far as that Twitter post, one of the other things that's happened since I was terminated is that I did start a political action committee in response to the governor, who has been removing board members from seats and endorsing and sponsoring. So I will tell you, I wore a very political hat in the role that I am currently in. In the event I am the superintendent, that political hat will be removed. But at this point right now, honestly, I believe as a Florida student and advocate, I really need to be talking about things that aren't being spoken about. And I'm concerned about what's happening in Florida in their public education system in the event that it's actually being dismantled. As far as DEI, I think, mental health supports are extremely important. And I also know that DEI and mental health are going together, because we do have students in some of our schools that are having inappropriate racially charged comments said to them or homophobic comments that will impact mental health. So I think that we really should be talking about them all together and making sure that we're providing safe spaces. And so I look at DEI, I get a little concerned that it's an acronym that perhaps is losing its value and meaning, but I think it's important for public school systems to make sure that we treat everybody kindly, fairly, and have a respectful learning space. And that's, I think, something that we should be focusing on all the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Simon. Thanks for coming. My name's Dan McLaughlin. I've been a resident of Belmont my whole life. I've had 5 kids who have spent time in the Belmont public school system, and unfortunately, in my opinion, since my first child went to the Winbrook School about 25 years ago, I think it's gone steadily downhill. I know a lot of people want to ask questions, so maybe we can do a little bit of a lightning round. Is that okay with you? Just quick questions and answers?
I think one question will be appropriate, because we do have a long line and we have.
All right, well, it's going to be one question with some follow-ups then, I guess, because it's multi-part to it. My question is, were you for or against the, I think they call it the Parental Rights Bill, or more commonly known as the Don't Say Gay Bill in Florida?
Am I for or against?
Were you for or against that?
That bill is written in a manner that it's subject to interpretation. It is not as detailed that policy needs to be in order to be successful. And I think what we're running into is that bill is being used, even in the fact that if you would see, like, our Commissioner of Education is repeatedly having to come back to the community to tell them that interpretations aren't working.
All right, well, I'm trying to get to what you think, so let me just ask you a couple specific things from it.
I actually think that good policy needs to be clear and have little ability for nuance. And what I think is happening specifically in Florida, and because of how school districts are handling this policy, is the fact that there isn't a consistent understanding about this, that this is going to be challenging and hurtful to people who are trying to educate students and also protect rights, because I'm a parent as well. And so I think it's important that parents have a lot of influence in the decisions that are happening in their education, their healthcare, and so forth. But this bill, how it is written, is doing a disservice to the citizens of Florida.
Okay, so just like 2 aspects.
I'm sorry, but that was one
No,
question.
this is not right, because I'm trying to get to the crux of the issue here, which is that bill states that children aged K through 3 should not be taught about sexual orientation or gender issues. Do you agree with that portion of the bill or not?
I think you asked.
I know and there's so many people here because the answers are so long. Right.
I don't think it's a yes or no response.
Do you think parents should not be informed when their children receive emotional, mental, or physical health services from a school?
I think it's important for the school district to make sure that they're communicating with families on the education experience for their children.
Okay, and do you believe in the teaching of critical race theories in school? How are we supposed to vet somebody if we can't ask questions? Yes, because the answers to, don't touch me.
Can we just give space for other people?
Yes, I'm trying to ask some questions though.
So we had said one question per person, and that's what we're trying to stick to.
All right, so we have an ideologue here.
Hi, thanks for being here tonight. So my name is Melissa Irian. I'm a town meeting member, Precinct 8, and I have twin 7th graders and an 11th grader in the district. So my question is about field trips. Do you support and would you authorize and advocate for field trips for all grades, and particularly starting with overnight field trips, 5th grade, DC field trips, 8th grade, that sort of thing? Thank you.
So I think field trips are extremely important, and I think that they are something that we need to make sure that we have the funding for and those experiences. I can also tell you my middle son would let me know if I was wrong, because one of his biggest complaints, we were at Cincinnati Public Schools and we moved back to Florida, and due to the funding, he has had 0 field trips in Florida, and that has been a huge issue, and he talks about it, and I think that we need to make sure that we prioritize those experiences.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Dr. Simon.
Hi.
My name is Joya Rizzo. I work in the Office of the Superintendent.
Oh.
This is a budget-related question.
Okay.
So our district is often charged on the school department side with... Oh. Alrighty then. Our school department is often charged with budget cuts at the 7-figure level, and that usually means that there are staffing implications, programmatic changes, sometimes dissolution of programs. So I'm wondering if you can speak to your direct experience in the area of delivering uncompromised education to all of the students while maintaining your staff and an invigorated culture during a fiscal complexity like that.
So as far as funding cuts, I have quite a bit of experience associated with that. In my position, though, I did have the added opportunity of the ESSER funding that came into play. But regardless if ESSER funding was there or not, we still needed to go through the processes of examining our efficiency and our efficacy, making sure we have personnel placed in positions that they can meet the most needs to support the most staff members, teachers, and students. And so I think that that is something to evaluate. My understanding as I consider my role in this position would be to do a considerable amount of discussions and informing and advocacy to the community as far as how funding is distributed into the school system. It's pretty clear that there is an interest in this investment. I think it's my responsibility as well to make sure that everybody understands the finances and we talk about them so we all know what we're talking about and asking for, because I think that we know that if we are reducing important staff members in the district, then the quality of instruction will diminish. And I think it's very much my responsibility to do everything I can to keep that from happening. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Hi, thank you. My name's Mary Lewis. I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader in the district, and I'm also a town meeting member, which you'll learn about if you were to come. I was struck by your remark that the turnover rate for teachers is very low, and we all are so proud of our teachers and grateful for the quality of education that our students receive. We have, however, had an extraordinary turnover in principals in our district. And so I'm wondering if you could address what about your leadership style cultivates a sense of growth, engagement, and thus retention among your staff. Thank you.
So I think quality of work environment is a key factor in retention. And that also includes pushing people to burnout. So excellent staff members, administrators, they can't run on all cylinders at all times. And at some point that will either stop, break, they'll transition to another place of employment. So I think it's very much important to work with them to find out what are things that I can do to alleviate these pressures. I do feel that when I compare, I had a district of 30,000 students, and you're just under 5. There are some infrastructure administrative decisions that I think are perhaps adding additional burden to administrators. But all of these types of situations would need to be discussed, explored, and I would really take the lead of administrators talking to me about what they need in order to be able to continue to do the good work, because burnt out administrators doesn't do any of us good.
Hi, my name's Steve Sloan. Thanks for your interest in the position and being here tonight. A good sense on the value of being outdoors for the health, physical and mental well-being of children, helping them learn, among other things. We don't have a policy on recess in town. There's not one in the state. Do you have a theory of recess and what grades might benefit from it? Thank you.
I actually think outside time is important regardless of your age. I think play is essential to learning. Actually, I had some discussions with the high school student government, and I think that that's something that even at the high school level, working hard academically is incredibly important, but we also need rest and we also need play to let our brains process, problem solve, and all of that. So I would be very much interested in working with the committee to look at our policies and see what we need to do to make sure that we have those times for the outlets. I have 3 boys. We needed to be moving. We happen to have a Montessori education, which I think helped out in that process, but I know that we need to have access to outside spaces, and making sure that we embrace play almost as important as reading and mathematics, and in fact, actually, it is as important in my mind. So.
Dr. Simon, and just for those asking questions, because we got started a few minutes late, I can go another 5 minutes, but I have to keep things the same across all candidates, so we have another 5 or 6 minutes, so if you could ask your questions quickly and respond quickly. Okay. Thank you.
Hi there, my name is Kara Sassone, and excuse me, because of some schedule juggling, I'm here this evening with my 2 5th graders. They're twins, and they happen to be listening to the first candidate who was here this evening. My daughter formed these 2 questions that she wanted to ask but did not want to come to the podium. The 2 questions are, how, as superintendent, would you help students embrace their identity? And how would you, as superintendent, work to stop bullying at Belmont Public Schools? Thank you.
So, first off, I think this goes into our discussions of how we treat people and communicate with people, and this is stuff that I do see that is aligned with certain efforts to make sure that we have safe and inclusive environments. We should have a no tolerance for bully policy. We need to address it, but I think what's also happening is that we aren't having our relationship building opportunities as often as we should. Having social emotional learning as a time period is good, but it really needs to be embedded in everything we do. And I think for our students, I mean, all of us do not want to ever be considered cogs, and we need to make sure that we have that relationship time for people to understand who we are, what our values are, what our needs are. And so I would like us to focus on really having these discussions with students and nurturing these environments and letting them be creative and identify, as well as change over time. I mean, how I saw myself at 9 and how I saw myself at 16, those were very different things, and we should allow that type of growth. And so those opportunities need to be embedded in the instruction as well as the teaching staff, but I feel from my discussions with staff, I feel like that is, that's definitely something that they are interested in nurturing if they aren't already doing it, and I think most of them are.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you see as the similarities and differences between your previous positions and the superintendency in Belmont? And a follow-up to that is, what do you see as some challenges to adapting to the superintendency here in Belmont?
Okay. So similarities, obviously, there are just things, regardless of the size, that must be in place in order to run a school district. So you need to have high-quality staffing, you need to have good communication with your parents, you need to have systems and organization to make sure that we can deliver the service of educating students. The differences, there is a size difference. I will say, I like the idea of a smaller school district in the aspect that 30,000 students, it's very hard to have meaningful relationships. unless you've either had a previous relationship or something very unique and specific has occurred. And so I think that there will be more opportunities for people to get to know me as a person and not just the figurehead of a superintendent, and vice versa. I think that challenges will be the limiting of the finances, along with just the structural aspect of it. As an example, I had a staff member who did public relations. So I had a person who is employed to do all forms of communication. And I know that that doesn't exist at this place in time, and I think that is important. And so trying to figure out how to navigate the complexity of a larger system that had more human capital resources will be something that I'm going to have to think about and really problem solve through.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stop us there. Okay. I'm really sorry. But I have to keep it the same amount of time across all candidates. So thank you, Dr. Simon, for answering all of those questions and for being with us this evening. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn the school committee.
So moved.
Second. All aye. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. It is about 6:06 p.m. I'm going to call the school committee to order. So this is our public forum with our superintendent candidate, Dr. Kimo Carter, who is here with us this evening. I am going to remind everybody that we are both recording this tonight as well as live streaming it. The recordings of this, as well as any of the other interviews and forums, will be available at the latest on Monday. And because of that, we've extended the feedback evaluation form through next Tuesday, and all of that is available on the web page. I have had a few questions about, will the school committee be deliberating next Tuesday at our school committee meeting? That is not the plan. There are still reference checks that need to be done. So I do not, at this time, even have a meeting posted that would involve deliberation, but we will certainly inform the public when the plan for that is. So in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Carter to introduce himself to us, and then I will turn to comments from the public, questions from the public. I would ask that people come to the podium in order to ask a question of Dr. Carter. And if you could please remember that we are trying to get as many questions in as possible within the 30-minute time period, which is the period that I need to hold to, because that is fair to all candidates to do so. So if you could please keep your questions to ones that are quickly asked and can be responded to in 2 to 3 minutes, so that we could get as many of them in. I would appreciate that, and I think we would all appreciate that of one another. And just a reminder that the questions should be hopefully about Dr. Carter's professional life that will help you to think about Dr. Carter as a superintendent here in Belmont, to inform your feedback to the school committee on that. And so with that, Dr. Carter, I will turn it over to you.
All right, good evening, everyone. Oh, okay, I get used to this microphone. I'll put it a little further back away. I have a naturally loud voice, so. Oh, it's good for the cameras too? Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you for taking the time. It's Friday night. It's St. Patrick's Day. There's a really good show happening at Belmont High School. There's a lot of other things that are happening, and so taking your time to meet with the candidates, I think, is terrific. I'll do a brief introduction, because I think probably the best thing to do is to try to answer as many questions as I can in the allotted time, and I'll try to make my answers short and succinct. I wasn't too good in the interview. I was a little more long-winded then, and so I'm going to try to do that. But if it's not enough, if you could follow up, maybe that would be helpful there. So briefly, my name is Kimo Carter. Kimo is Hawaiian for James, so if you look at my birth certificates, you'll see James, but I will not turn around if someone calls me James. The reason is that I was born in Hawaii. My father was born in Hawaii as well. We have a lot of roots, or I have a lot of family connections in Hawaii, and I've been named Kimo ever since I can remember. And when your father names you something, you stick with that name. That's sort of how it is in my family, and I'm actually kind of proud of my name, and I learned, have a really interesting perspective growing up in Hawaii. I moved to California in high school, went to Palo Alto High School in Palo Alto, California, and it's a very similar kind of high school as Belmont High School. Went to college at Wesleyan University, didn't know what I was going to do, and my transforming job was being a program aide at Perkins School for the Blind in Watertown. I thought I was wanting to go to law school because I was a government major, wanted to do a year of community service, or, paid a little bit, but it was mostly community service. I lived on campus because they needed people to, if there was a fire alarm, to escort kids down. I had to learn sign language and Braille. It was one of the hardest jobs I ever had, probably the most rewarding job I had. I worked with 18 to 22-year-old students who were getting prepared to live as independently as possible in an apartment or assisted apartment situation, and fell in love with education, and I'm glad I took that path. So I worked 5 years at Perkins, first at the after-school program and then in the classroom, and then worked to get my teaching certificate in social studies, taught 7th grade social studies at the Locke Middle School in Billerica, and certainly learned a lot teaching. Just because you were a good student, and I was a good student, does not mean you're a good teacher. In fact, you actually have to learn a little bit more because you have to empathize with the students who aren't, getting the curriculum as quickly as you did when you were there. So I learned a whole lot there. Ended up becoming a nationally board certified teacher in Billerica. Thought I could go into administration, but that was a hard decision for me because I really did love teaching, and I still do miss the kids. Did an internship. I did a degree program at Harvard, at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Did an internship at the McCormick Middle School in Dorchester. It's right next to the Bayside Expo Center, that Columbia Point area, and had a really excellent mentor, Muriel Leonard, who really, and I still think about, in administrative, if I have a hard decision, I ask myself, what would Muriel do? She was a real, one of the best administrators that I've been around. After 2 years of being an assistant principal in Townsend at the Hawthorne Brook Middle School, I sort of found my place as principal at Watertown Middle School. 13 years in Watertown Middle School from 2005 to 2013. No, 2018, I'm getting my math wrong. At that point in 2005, I was the fifth principal in 6 years. There was a reputation of, and I think probably an undeserved reputation of Watertown Middle School being one of the more problematic schools in the district. And through a lot of hard work and a lot of innovation from administration and from teachers, we became the model school in the district. I'm really proud of the work of everyone that we've done there. And maybe you have some connections of families in Watertown that you can talk about, because they will talk about how Watertown Middle School grew and changed in that time. At that point, I was ready to become, I went to Boston College and got my EDD degree in a superintendent preparation program, and really my goal was to become eventually a superintendent. My first step to becoming a superintendent was to be an assistant superintendent. I was fortunate to become assistant superintendent for the last 5 years at the Weston Public Schools. And I've been working as the Weston assistant superintendent since. I'm a resident of Belmont. I've lived in Belmont since 1995. My students, my two boys have gone through, they went to Cambridge Friends in elementary school, so they didn't go to elementary school here. But starting in 5th grade or 6th grade, they came to the Belmont Public Schools. They went to the Chenery Middle School. They went to Belmont High. One has graduated 4 years ago, and one has graduated 8 years ago. They are, now that I know that they're young adults, some of them, especially one of them, had a fairly tough time of it as they went through the Belmont Public Schools. But I can tell you that that's 2 success stories. Very pleased with how they've done. So when this job opportunity opened up, I'm ready to become a superintendent after 5 years of being an assistant superintendent. Belmont, which is a absolutely wonderful school district that many districts look to, has an opening. How could I pass it up? And I live here. So that's sort of where I'm coming from as far as this. So I had a wonderful tour, visit of a lot of schools, met with a lot of people, and after meeting with everyone, I'm even more excited than ever. So that's where I'm. That's where I'm right now, and so I think now we can open it up for some questions.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. So if people just want to come up to the podium and get in line, and please, let's start with one question. So if you could ask one question of Dr. Carter, and then if there's time after that and people have a follow-up, they can come back and do that. Thank you. Please introduce yourself to Dr. Carter as well.
Hi, my name's Steve Sloan. Thanks so much for your interest in the position. There's a lot of great science on the value of recess, the health benefits of being outside, physical and mental well-being. We track pretty well, I think, through fourth grade, but without a policy in Belmont and with no policy in Massachusetts, our recess drops off to near nothing after that. I was kind of curious if you had a magic wand, who would get recess in our system? Thank you.
If I had a magic wand, everyone would get recess, including me. No, I need that break, that outside break as much as anybody does, and different kids have different learning needs as far as that whole thing is concerned. I think that time and learning law, that 990 hours, and not have it being funded, because again, if you have a lengthier school day, you need to adjust teacher contracts in order to make that happen, has really been an unanticipated consequence of really reducing recess, especially at the secondary level, even though the motivation of the law was something that they would do. But we learned something in COVID. We had outdoor lunch. I've been a middle school principal for a long time. Why didn't I think about outdoor lunch before COVID? I've done so many lunch duties. I know how lunch is. I can feel the noise, and I can feel whether it's a happy noise or an edgy noise, when you're in the cafeteria. And now in Weston, kids have the option to eat indoors or outdoors, both at the high school and at the middle school. And then, there's some, especially at the middle school, there's a little basketball court and a little bit, of an open space for, if kids want to exercise or play a game. We put a little gaga pit ball pit there. And so actually in Weston, kids are having their lunch, and those kids who need that recess time are getting it. And boy, does it make a difference. It makes a huge difference, especially in the afternoon. And Weston is a place where we have the late school start time, so that afternoon drags for many kids because school lets out at 3:20. So that's something that I'd be very supportive of as far as that. And I'm looking at the new building. I see some tables outside. What can we do so that we can open things up so that kids who need to go out can go out?
Hello, my name is Melissa Irian, town meeting member, Precinct 8, and I have twin 7th graders and an 11th grader in the district. So my question is about field trips. Thank you for being here tonight, by the way. So would you authorize and advocate for field trips for all grades?
I think place-based learning is a really powerful way of learning. It's a memorable experience for students, and that's something that's very important. At the same time, when we offer a field trip, it's for all students. That means that we need to make the accommodations and make sure that the staffing is appropriate so that all students can go on the field trips. And sometimes there's a cost to that. And again, that's something that you have to weigh, the costs of that. And I think it's from my perspective, often there's a cost that we charge people as far as field trips are concerned, but for the specialized services that we may need to bring with some kids, I'm not sure if that's a charge that is appropriately to be placed on families. So we would need to figure that out if we're thinking about field trips, especially those field trips that might be more extensive. So for instance, we had an 8th grade Washington trip at Watertown Middle School, and there had to be a lot of planning involved for that, and budgeting involved for that in order for that 8th grade Washington trip to run.
Is that something you're supportive of?
Yes, in general, I am supportive of field trips. Yes.
So an overnight 5th grade, overnight DC field trips, I'm sure your boys participated in. I don't know if you're aware, there's a Chenery fund for children that have, equity needs in terms of funding, scholarships, and
I'm sorry,
things like that.
I have to, Dr. Carter, if you want to answer that one quickly, but then we need to move on to the next person, please.
So in general, I'm supportive of field trips. Yes, but I think there's some logistics that you have to sort of think through very carefully.
Hi. My name is Laura Burns. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 6. Thank you for giving your time this evening. At approximately $16,000 per student spending, our budget is tight and we have a community of smart, engaged students and parents that demand high performance at the school. This performance is based on strong teachers and school leadership. And recently we've had a fair amount of turnover in school principals. Can you tell us a little bit about your leadership style and how it cultivates a healthy environment for staff and thus retention?
I think that's extremely important. In Weston, we've been very fortunate to have less turnover than sort of what we see in average. It's very difficult in this day and age to be a principal or to be any kind of administrator in the public schools. And I think one thing that we've been able to do in Weston, and part of it is because of me, but part of it is because of our team, is that one of our big priorities is to support principals in the jobs that they do, as well as department heads and directors and other school leaders as well. I was talking to the principals this afternoon. We had a little forum there, and they asked the same question, like, how would you support us? And actually, we modeled that because a principal brought up a situation that was a dilemma that didn't really have an easy answer, didn't really know the context, and what I was able to do is, like I usually do when I confer with all principals, is ask them questions, walk them through their thought process of what options that could be able to be made. And on one hand, if I feel that they're on the right direction, encouraging them and support, that type of thing. And on the other hand, if I feel that they're sort of on the other one, listen to them, understand exactly where they're coming from first, because any communication, it's listening first and then speaking, and then offering my alternate opinion as far as that whole thing is concerned. But we have a system in Weston where every principal has at least 2 people from central office that are go-to people for that principal. And it really depends on this sort of the experience areas so I really work with the secondary principals quite a bit. And our director of equity and professional learning, who was a former elementary principal, works really closely with the elementary principals. And obviously our superintendent is their direct supervisor, and she works with all the principals there. And that's sort of a way that we do, that we work with them. And I think our principals feel supported. They feel, that they can lead. And we've have honest, trusting relationships so that, if it becomes too much, we can, try to make things work so that that it is. Because we have our good days and bad days, that's for sure, as administrators in the public schools.
Hi, I think my name's Mary Lewis. I'm also a town meeting member, and I have a 7th grader and a 9th grader in the district. Thank you for being here. My question kind of builds on that, but it has to do with the financial situation that we're in and sort of what we need to do to get out of it. So as you probably know, Proposition 2.5 allows for towns to vote tax increases for operating budgets in a so-called override. And while a superintendent does not run an override campaign, its success does depend on the superintendent's transparency, the trust that he or she or they, can gain from the general population, and consensus building between the schools and the citizens of Belmont. So it's a lot to ask of someone in their first 6 months, but that's kind of the timeline that we're looking at to gain that trust in order to maybe pass an override, hopefully in April of 2024. So I'm wondering how you could hit the ground running in achieving those 3 goals of transparency, trust, and consensus in 6 months.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, I know.
but it's also in my wheelhouse. This is something that I'm very successful doing. I had that public interview. I'm not going to go over that, but one of the strengths that I have, and I feel a little bit weird talking, selling myself there, but I feel that I'm a boundary spanner. I feel that I can make connections very quickly with people. I feel I can build trust. The keys to building trust, yes, to be humble, to be, taking an inquiry stance and questioning with people, to acknowledge the work that they're doing and their positions that they have, they all help. But really the key to earning trust is to be competent in your job and do what you say you're going to do in a transparent kind of way. And that is a track record that I have had year after year as far as that thing. I think I'm pretty good with the social graces as well, but if you don't have that backbone, if you don't have that follow through, you're not going to earn the trust of whether it's teachers, whether it's students, whether it's community members. And again, I'll hit the ground running, trying to connect with as many people as possible, listening first, and then talking, and hopefully we can find sort of and once we can build sort of that connection, that web, that network of relationships, perhaps we can find consensus about how we can tackle this really, from what I hear, it's quite a dilemma that we're facing right now as far as financing schools and really making sure that kids, because again, it's all about the students, what we need to provide so that they can learn, all kids can learn at high levels.
Hi, I'm Christina Marsh. I'm a parent of a 7th grader and also a town meeting member. Thank you for being here tonight. I was curious to hear, I appreciate you describing your trajectory and the different positions. I was curious to hear how you see there being similarities in what you have been doing in these previous positions to the superintendent position, and also how you see the differences in them and things in your leadership style or management style that you would be changing or growing differently in the new position?
It's a really great question. And I'll just talk about my assistant superintendency. I've been really fortunate to work with Dr. Mitch Connolly, who's the superintendent of Weston Public Schools. And ever since COVID, where it was almost necessary, we've been working as partners. As a superintendent, she's been doing more of the outward-facing work, and I have done a lot of the inward-facing work as the assistant superintendent. But I play a different role in Weston than a typical assistant superintendent plays in a typical district, where it's more of a broader leadership role that I have in Weston that I've sort of grown into, and that my superintendent has allowed me to do there. So I interact regularly with school committee members, so I have some experience working with the school committee. I am on negotiations. It's very rare that an assistant superintendent of teaching and learning would be on the negotiation team, but I'm there. I have led and successfully led subcommittees in the negotiating team, for pieces of the contract that have tentative agreements, even though we're still quite far apart in negotiations as we're working together. So I have a broader experience than most, and I still have learning to do. I think I really need to, I certainly understand budget from a theoretical standpoint, but there's value in living through a budget process to anticipate problems in the first place, and I will have to depend on the assistant superintendent of budget and finance in order to do that. And there's a couple of other areas, especially outward-facing, working with members of town government that I'm going to need some support from the school committee and from the general public as far as building relationships so that we can all work together on behalf of kids and families.
Hi, Dr. Carter. My name is Kim Edmonds. I am a BPS alum and a parent of 3 current students. So recently there have been educational trends to de-level and remove students' abilities to accelerate in the pursuit of equity. For some students, academics is their strength and their solace, just as music and arts are for others. You mentioned that the Grading for Equity initiative in Weston, which may have involved piloting a 0 to 4 grade scale as opposed to the traditional 100-point scale. Would you consider implementing something like that and or any limits to acceleration if you came to Belmont? And could you explain if you feel that's equitable to students whose strengths lie with academics?
That's quite a question. Not at this time, is the short answer, but I would need to learn more. I think it's important, and as I explained in the interview, I actually talked about they asked me about one mistake I made, and the grading in Weston was a mistake that I made that I talked, and I think it's recorded so that you can talk about that there. It's really important when we do any equity initiative is to make sure we're all together. When there is division or misunderstanding, among staff members, among community members, we need to pause and go slow to move fast and listen to all the constituents' concerns and really take a look at the research also that says, what might be best practice. With that, you were talking about leveling. There's actually a lot of mixed research about that. There's a lot of research that really focuses on de-leveling students, but then when there's been follow-up studies, sometimes the outcomes don't match what the initial research would predict. So that's something to consider about, and that's something to really think carefully about before there's any sort of knee-jerk decision to go one way or the other.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Carter. My name is Joya Rizzo. I work in the Office of the Superintendent, and I have a budget-related question.
All right.
Our district is often charged with significant budget cuts in the 7-figure range, which affect everything from staffing to programmatic changes, and in some case, dissolution of programs entirely to suffice the town's budget constraints. In your experience, have you ever dealt with a budget deficit that large, and what was your plan to maintain uncompromised education for the students?
Not in Weston. Weston is a very well-funded school district, though we are experiencing some budget cuts this year because it's been a hard year for every district this year. A lot of cost increases this year that are sort of not under any district's control that we have to do. Utilities is one of them. In Watertown, we had significant cuts, but I experienced them as principal and not so much as superintendent. But what I was able to do, and this is a process that I would probably do, is that I had a lot, as principal, I know my school, and I know what is absolutely essential and what is less essential there. And it's really important that those voices are heard as we make those very difficult decisions. The other thing that we need to do proactively, and I think it's really important on the communication side of things, so when I researched Belmont, because again, I'm just a parent, I wanted to learn more about the schools, wanted to look at the website and a lot of other documents there. I saw a lot of information, this is the event that's coming up and things like that, but I didn't see so much celebration. There's a lot of good happening in Belmont, and we need to know about it. Our students talked about, when I met with students today, they talked about there was a sort of a community international kind of thing that happened like over last weekend. Had no clue that was happening or what was good. Certainly a very positive event, certainly tied to the district's goals as far as multiculturalism is concerned. But, that's something that we need to celebrate. That's something that's good that's happening in Belmont. Mean Girls, I hear, is absolutely a phenomenal performance. So could there be something about how kids have experienced or how kids work together collaboratively to put on such a high quality musical? I mean, that would be something that to celebrate and to sort of think about. When the community knows what good we do as a district And we're working on this in Weston, same problems, that we need to think about that. When the community knows what we do as a district, hopefully there will be a critical mass of people who say, yes, it's worth the expenditure, so that we can get to a level where we are guaranteeing all students that high quality education that they deserve.
This is going to be the last question for this evening because of the time constraint, so thank you.
If you want to meet with me right at the end.
But that's right, you can do it in
I can do it quiet,
off
I
the
can
cuff.
do it privately, offline, yeah.
Good evening, Dr. Carter. It's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here on a Friday. I was hoping that you might share an idea that you brought to Weston that you implemented as assistant superintendent, and then share some evidence of how that was successful.
All right, it's not an original idea, but it was a necessary thing that we needed to bring to Weston. All school districts really need to develop a multi-tiered system of support to meet the needs of all learners. And Weston did not had some pieces of it, but really did not have a system of support for students. And so that's been a really sort of a multi-year process of developing ways where teachers can first use data to understand where the kids' strengths and gaps are, and then systematically plan intervention and support for those students who are not meeting those expectations, and extend those students who are already meeting those expectations, into higher levels. Involves a whole lot of things. It involves a lot of teacher training, and it involves rescheduling. We have instituted flex blocks, and I think in Belmont you have wind blocks, which are the same kind of thing in Weston. And what we see is, at least from our STAR scores in elementary school, hasn't hit MCAS yet, but we do see a closing of gaps in our STAR reading and math scores there, and that's hopeful. Hopefully it will translate to the MCAS. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. Thank you, everybody who's here this evening as well. It's been a very full day for Dr. Carter, but if you are willing to stay around after the meeting and people have questions, for sure. And with that, I would take a motion to adjourn. So moved. All in favor? Aye. Thank you, everyone.